When the pandemic first started and we had no idea that it was going to affect our business till March of 2020. Orders from public health, roadblocks, restriction. It was a very hard time for me. What really has saved my business is the SBA and the PPP program. I felt keeping the employees was so important because I had faith that my government would help me later, the federal government. We applied and we received 2 PPP loans equaling up to $425,000. That money saved me because it's been 2 years. I think 80 or 90% of the restaurants have closed. The only reason I'm here because of my devoted clientele and the federal government.
Thank you for helping save jobs with federal funds.
Thank you to the federal government for all the federal ARP money.
Thank you for the federal funds.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Have you or a loved one been injured through medical negligence or substandard medical care? Are you angry? File complaints through the Guam Board of Medical Examiners to make physicians accountable. It's time that we stand up to protect our families and the people of Guam. The complaint form can be found at GBME's website, www.guammedical.org. Have questions or want the form emailed to you? Contact us at asher@asherdeanlubofsky.com or our Facebook page, www.facebook.com/bunzoasher. We do not provide legal or other professional info or services. We do this to improve medical care on Guam through medical accountability equity. Justice for those injured or killed through medical negligence on Guam.
Half a day. This is Governor Lou Leon Guerrero. If you're struggling to pay rent and utilities because of the pandemic, your government can help. Our Emergency Rental Assistance Program provides direct relief to you. To date, over $6.9 million has helped over 1,500 households.
Apply online at eoa.guam.gov or call the Department of Administration's Emergency Rental Assistance Program at 671-638-4518 or 19.
Hi, good morning. I'm Troy Torres with Kandit News. Welcome to our offices here on the 7th floor of the DNA building in Hagåtña, Guam. And today is not one of those news days. It's one of those let's discuss something days. Let's try to break down a complicated subject and bring it to you as plainly as possible. And let me just start by saying, we began reporting on a lawsuit in the Superior Court of Guam. Maybe about 3 months ago, we began the reports, and they were about, it's this corporation that is owned by a certain Leon Guerrero family, suing their sister-in-law, her name is Mary Leon Guerrero, and a company called Columbus Development Corporation, we'll talk about that in just a second, plus Pacific American Title and Insurance Company, that's a title company on Guam, and a couple of people. There's actually now 2 lawsuits involving the same, what we call Tumon land scam. This was Mary sold the one-third interest of a company called ULG, which is 1/3 interest of the land under the old Tropicana Hotel. That's now the Guam Beachfront Residences. Guam Beachfront Residences holds the lease and is operated by Grandview Corporation. Grandview Corporation is owned by Columbus Development Corporation. Yada, yada, yada. It's one of the Lucio Tan companies on Guam. If you don't know who Lucio Tan is, he's a pretty big deal, actually. He's one of the richest men in the Philippines and one of the elite of the world. He's a billionaire. He belongs to the billionaire class. And since 1972, Lucio Tan has been invested in Guam in one way or another. As a matter of fact, it is his family over the past 30-some years who have been running his businesses, who've been living here on Guam and running businesses on Guam. Now, I know Guam is a nice place, right? Guam's a pretty place to live and all. But, you know, sometimes you just tend to wonder what makes people decide to come here and live here when they have all the options in the world to live anywhere that they want to. And yeah, this is a beautiful island and everything. But, you know, something tells me a lot of it has to do with money. And so as we were reporting on this Tumon land scam that involves a Lucio Tan company, we started to delve a little deeper because there were some coincidences in the timing and the dates of certain actions in the lawsuit with some tectonic shifts in Lucio Tan's companies, not just in Guam, but in the Philippines. Lucio Tan, by the way, has operated his multi-billion-dollar conglomerate from the Philippines, Hong Kong, I think there might be somewhere in Europe, I'm not sure, but Guam as well. But, you know, who is Lucio Tan, right? And so it took us quite a while to put all of this together. These papers you see around here, I'm going to show these to you up close and personal so that you can understand what we have come to understand after rifling through 50 years, literally 50 years worth of public documents revealing corporate charters, revealing the web of corporations that are Lucio Tan's companies on Guam. And though this web does seem suspicious, we can't make any judgment calls just yet. The only thing we can say is that this web of corporations since 1972 is suspicious. Is there any illegal, unethical conduct? I don't know. I do not know. We do not know. These documents don't say, and you know, who is going to file a document at the Department of Revenue and Taxation that reveals illegal conduct? And no, it's so, and so that's not the point here. But the point here is to understand better things that go on or may happen in this island, so that we are more alert and more aware of our surroundings and what makes things go on this island. So the first thing that I think we should understand is what is money laundering. We hear it all the time in the movies and stuff. And in the simplest terms, money laundering is one of a couple of things. One, money laundering is the taking of illegally gotten cash and turning it into, making it look like that cash was legally gotten. So, an example, probably the most popular example, is drug money. So if you're a drug dealer and you need to make your purchases of your home, your car, what you place into a bank account, purchases of jewelry, etc., your lifestyle, your family's lifestyle. If you need to make that look legitimate, so you're taking in all these proceeds from the sale of drugs, you cannot just deposit that in the bank and everything will be fine. There are banking laws and there are regulations. There are requirements for the reporting of a certain amount of cash beyond whatever. And certain deposits that are up to the brink, you can't just make those deposits every day and the bank won't notice. You'll get reported, and then the Secret Service, the FBI, the Department of the Treasury, they will begin to look into, because they're very serious about the legal accumulation of cash. And so in order to make that cash look legitimate, you have to launder it. And it's not, you don't put it in the washing machine like some dummies do, and then the cash is clean. That's not what you do. So you would, for instance, start a cash-intense business, such as gambling, or bingo, or maybe if you're not laundering that much cash, a hot dog stand, or a concession, or the flea market even. Or you become a quote-unquote farmer who doesn't even know how to plant anything, but you know, these are, and you supposedly sell your farm goods on the side of the road. These are just examples, okay, of cash-intense businesses. So you would start a business like that, and you would cook the books. You would say that you made, you know, on this day you made all this money. So the proceeds from the drug sales, you legitimize by incorporating those monies into your daily sales in your cash-rich companies. If you ever go to a mom and pop store, and you notice that they don't use the register when they ring things up, that's an automatic red flag that there's money being laundered through that store, you know, because they don't want the machine to record the actual sales. So they take out the calculator, or they do the math in their head, or they never touch that register. There's something going on. Or they pull cash out from their pockets. Yeah, there's another example of something. Okay, so that's one way of laundering money, right? And it doesn't have to be drug proceeds. It could be illegal gambling proceeds, or you know, there are laws about how businesses and corporations and partnerships ought to operate. Among those is you cannot blackmail people. But let's say in your heavy competition, you begin to blackmail people, or you receive, you know, funding from this company to do something illegal in the business world or for your industry, or that is a violation of antitrust laws. The receipt of that money is illegally gotten, and so you have to launder the money. The other way of laundering money is to change its complexion. And what I mean by that, there are two complexions that money has. Taxable income and non-taxable income. So if you want to change what would generally be taxable income in the community you're in into non-taxable income, you change the complexion of that money. You change the way that you report how that money was gotten. And so these are the sort of simple explanations of money laundering that there are, just as a precursor to this discussion, okay? Now, what is a corporation? Who owns a corporation? Now, a corporation, according to the laws ever since, I think this is the Nixon administration, corporations are considered people. Even though they have no physiology, according to the laws of our country, a corporation is a person and has rights like a person has. Now, in Guam, when you start a corporation, like Kandit is incorporated, and it has, we are the owners of Kandit, or the shareholders of Kandit, are protected to a great degree, shielded by this corporation that we're in, Kandit Incorporated. And there are certain responsibilities that the shareholders have, and these responsibilities you find in their articles of incorporation, which are sometimes changed, and in your bylaws that rule how the corporation is governed. All of these things are filed over at the Guam Department of Revenue and Taxation. Corporations are generally transparent, so you understand who owns a corporation. And here is I want to show you. So you can find this over at the Guam Department of Revenue and Taxation. Here is one of our annual, the minutes of the annual combined meeting of the directors and shareholders of Kandit, Inc. And this shows you the number of shares that we have in our company and who owns these shares, basically the owners of Kandit, Inc. And you see it right there. Now, these are publicly available. So it's very easy to see who owns Kandit. It's not, it's as transparent as it gets, right? Now, I've explained in a nutshell money laundering. I've explained corporate ownership on this island and how it's a part of public documents and all that stuff. Now, who is Lucio Tan? Lucio Tan is a billionaire who in about, I think, 1966. He's 87 years old right now. He was born in China. His family moved to the Philippines at a very young age. He was educated in the Philippines and he became a billionaire. He owns lots of companies, and according to Dun & Bradstreet, Lucio Tan is the chairman of LT Group Inc., which is a conglomerate of 480 companies throughout the world. 480 companies with, according to Dun & Bradstreet, meaning according to the amount of money that is transparent to Dun & Bradstreet and that has been reported. This group of companies owns assets of, standby, $26.5 billion as of the latest fiscal year. Its 2020 operating revenue was $1.8 billion. Lucio Tan is reportedly worth about $2 billion. Now that's what is reported in the Philippines. In 1966 is when he got his big break as a businessman, and that's when he opened a company called Fortune Tobacco, which to this day is the #1 tobacco producing and selling company in the Philippines. I believe it has a relationship with Philip Morris International. But his business, this guy certainly was a visionary, a risk taker, a hard worker is what everybody says that he is. And through that, he has built an empire. And that empire came to Guam in 1972. Now in 1972, Lucio Tan opened his first company on Guam called Columbus Development Corporation. And here it was October 11, 1972. Here are the first articles of incorporation. And in these articles of incorporation, it was pretty transparent back then as well. So as you saw, Kandit's transparent ownership. In October 1972, the ownership of Columbus Development Corporation was pretty transparent as well. It had 3 shareholders. A guy named Michael Tan, whose address was 911 New World Tower in Causeway Bay, Hong Kong. Someone named Sum Huen Wong. And Frank Casey Chan. Frank Casey Chan is actually from Guam. I don't know what Columbus Development Corporation did back in 1972, but at least it was transparently owned in 1972. So Columbus exists as the first Lucio Tan company from 1972, and then in 1980, something happens. Lucio Tan opens a bunch of companies. Well, I don't know if it was Lucio Tan himself, but Lucio Tan's operation here on Guam opens 3 new companies: Allied Pacific Development Group, Green Hill Inc., and probably the most popular of them, which is the one that we know to be the owner of the Micronesia Mall, Goodwin Development Corporation. Now, Allied Pacific Development Group was opened. And the interesting thing about this corporation, and it is to this day the main corporation. This is like the mother corporation of all of Lucio Tan's companies on Guam. It was actually incorporated by Lucio Tan himself. So Lucio Tan was here sometime in, I think this is August of 1980, and he signed these articles of incorporation and bylaws for Allied Pacific Development Group. Its share is a similar name with a bank that Lucio Tan owns in the Philippines, Allied Bank, which is one of two banks. He owns Allied Bank and Philippine National Bank. Now, Allied Pacific Development Group was, hold on. Sometime after 1980, in 1980, when it was started, its ownership consisted of Lucio Tan, Eng Chan Tan, I believe that's Lucio Tan's brother, Mariano Tanenglin, which is Lucio Tan's brother as well, Harry C. Tan, I believe that's also his brother, if I'm not mistaken, and Frank Chan. Frank Chan was one of the incorporators of Columbus Development Corporation. He was a Guam resident. And a corporation called Acrefield Limited, whose address is shared with Michael Tan, 911 New World Tower, 1618 Queens Road, Central Hong Kong. It owned 57,000 shares, which was the majority of the shares of Allied Pacific Development Corporation back in 1980. See that? Now, sometime between 1980 and 1986, remember the date 1986, the ownership of Allied Pacific changes, and instead of Acrefield Limited, it changes so that the ownership, the majority owner, is now Kingston Holding Company Incorporated, a new corporation. Now let's get to Kingston. What is Kingston? Kingston is, it's a corporation, and we're not entirely sure whether Lucio Tan knew it was created back in April 15 of 1986. And this corporation, when it was created, had three owners, Iris and Larry Wong, and Eusebio So. Now, Eusebio So is recycled through all of the Lucio Tan companies as the incorporator of different companies, including Green Hill Inc., which was also created in 1980, along with Allied Pacific. Iris and Larry Wong, it doesn't say who they are, but in this, before the company ownership was changed, this is Kingston Holding Company, by the way. They had the address P.O. Box 8308, Tumaning, Guam 96931. Which is synonymous with the address that Joseph Chua and Rowena Tan used. Now, we're getting ahead of ourselves. I'll explain Joseph Chua and Rowena Tan in just a second. And I hope you're still saying this is a web, okay, of ownership and changes in ownership, and you know, all of these companies linking to offshore accounts, which is, it's not illegal, it's not, but anyway, so Kingston Holding Company, Allied, from 1980 to 1986, sometime between 1980 and 1986, Allied changes its complexion from being owned by a Hong Kong company called Acrefield Limited to being owned by a now Guam company called Kingston Holding Company, Inc. Also in 1980, the Lucio Tan companies opened Green Hill, Inc. This was on the same day, March 31, 1980. Okay? And according to this, in 1980, Green Hill is owned by Grand Pacific Company, mostly. That's the majority share. Also Frank Chan and Chung Ki Wong, also known as Larry Chung Ki Wong, a name that appears in the Panama Papers. And that's not the first time or the first company that would appear in the Panama Papers that is involved with Lucio Tan's companies. Grand Pacific Corporation, I didn't bring the file here, but Grand Pacific Corporation, its main owner is Allied Pacific Development Corporation. So that road leads back to Allied Pacific. And then also incorporated on March 31, 1980 was Goodwin Development Corporation. Now Goodwin Development Corporation this is what people consider to be the main Lucio Tan company on Guam, but it really isn't. When Goodwin was created, it was created so that Allied Pacific was its main shareholder. This is back in 1980. Its other shareholders were Raymond Chong, Mao Song Chiang, and Randy Kai Chak Lee. Maybe two of those names are recycled throughout the corporate documents of these. Now, this is 1980. These three companies, Allied, Green Hill, and Goodwin, all created in 1980. And then from 1980 to 1986, these companies exist on their own and are linked to Allied Pacific Development Corporation, which is owned almost completely by Acrefield Limited in Hong Kong. So essentially, every business that fell under Goodwin, Green Hill, and by the way, American Bakery is under Green Hill, and Allied Pacific, all funnels back to Acrefield Limited. At the time, Columbus Development Corporation still is owned by those three people, one of them being Michael Tan, who shares the same exact address as Acrefield Limited, which is that 911 New World Tower in Hong Kong. And then something happens. Now, remember in 1983, if you know your history, in 1983, Senator Benigno Aquino is assassinated during the Marcos regime. This is during the time of martial law and all that stuff, right? And so there's a situation that's brewing in the Philippines where Lucio Tan and all of his companies are from. And so I managed to pull an article by Ab Tan. It's a special that appeared in the Washington Post. And Ab Tan, this says, has no relation to Lucio Tan. This is published on November 8, 1980 in the Washington Post. And it says, martial law in the Philippines has nurtured a new group of powerful business figures who have eclipsed old established interest that's held sway before President Ferdinand Marcos seized total control in 1972. Remember, 1972 is the same year that Lucio Tan started his first company on Guam. The fastest rising star and most enigmatic and controversial among them is a Chinese businessman, Lucio Tan, 47 at the time in 1980. He came into prominence only about 7 years ago and now controls a huge empire that stretches as far as London, San Francisco, Hong Kong, Guam, and Papua New Guinea. In a country where a dazzling ascent such as Tan's is unlikely without a strong helping hand, the business career of the former impoverished cigarette salesman has naturally drawn widespread interest. Tan's profile is unique, this article says, caught in the ideological cleavage of the influential Chinese community which controls the Philippines' banking, manufacturing, and trade, and which is largely pro-Taipei. Tan was considered too pro-Peking. This is how old this article is. Peking, yeah. The resources he is able to command have aroused fear and resentment among both the Chinese and the Philippine business community. His clout was best demonstrated last year, 1979, when the government gave him a license to operate a beer brewery to break the long monopoly of San Miguel, the giant food conglomerate. Originally, beer was listed as an overcrowded industry. Previous attempts by Kirin Beer of Japan, for example, to compete with San Miguel, brewer of a famous brand of Pilsen, found closed doors at the Board of Investments. But last year, the board was open to Tan and beer was taken from the overcrowded category. Immediately after Tan's Asia Brewery got the license, beer brewing became an overcrowded industry again. A letter of credit to purchase a mothballed plant in the United States was issued even before the episode was finished. Coming at a time when credit was extremely tight and the Central Bank of the Philippines' monetary priorities were in food production, Tan's triumph was a mirror of how close he has crept to the centers of power. A high school dropout, Tan impresses all who met him as foxy, quick, and a straight talker. The rough edges of an impoverished past still show. Hardly urbane, both adversaries and his own employees say he is a simple man in appearance, often dressed in a loose embroidered Philippine shirt. But even Tan adversaries admit Tan is an industrious worker. Indeed, his philosophy in business, he has boasted to friends and foes alike, is if you are in any industry, you must be number one. His drive to be number one has been largely achieved. His Allied Banking Corporation became the biggest commercial bank in the Philippines, building assets totaling $800 million in just 2 years. His cigarette company, this is 1980 by the way, Fortune Tobacco is the biggest, with sales of $270 million. His food processing plant, Foremost Farms, is the biggest in the country, and Tan announced he wants it to be the biggest in the whole of Asia as well. This goes on, etc., etc. And basically it just talks about how he was politically connected and he got what he wanted through politics and was able to achieve much because of his connections through the power centers of the Philippines. Now, that reputation followed him past the fall of Marcos, way past the fall of Marcos. I think it was in 2007 when the Philippine Supreme Court, because he was, let me just read this to you. The power of Lucio Tan. Depending on whom you believe, Lucio Tan is either a victim of Gestapo tactics by the Philippines Bureau of Internal Revenue or a tax dodger of mythic proportions. Recently, a 5-man division of the 15-member Supreme Court disagreed with the Bureau of Internal Revenue and came down on Tan's side in a 3-2 controversial ruling. It upheld an injunction stopping the Justice Department from hearing a tax fraud case against him. The cigarette, beer, banking property, and airline billionaire had argued that the lawsuit would single him out and violate his right to due process. He was accused of evading $1 billion in taxes in the Philippines. According to Dun & Bradstreet and to reports, he is worth $2 billion. Do the math on that. Now, he is reported to have remained close to the Marcoses. And by the way, the Marcoses are very close to coming back to power in their presidential elections in the Philippines this year. And things weren't going so well once Benigno Aquino was assassinated in 1983. And there was unrest in the country. The Marcoses were losing their control of the power centers of the Philippines. And then in 1986, the Marcoses are swept from power. There's a people power revolution that occurs from February 23 to February 25, 1986. I think we have pictures of like what some of that looked like. Yeah, so there's Cory Aquino being sworn in at EDSA. Here is part of that people power revolution. And so the Marcoses are swept from power. A year before the Marcoses are swept from power, Lucio Tan sends his daughter, his eldest daughter, Rowena Tan Chua, and her husband, Joseph Chua, to Guam. And they start making moves. They control the Tan companies on Guam from that point forward. And so things were relatively quiet in the Lucio Tan group of companies on Guam front from 1972 all the way into the 80s, and then coinciding with the fall of the Marcoses, things start to change on Guam. The first thing that starts to change in a very big and very noticeable way is the very first mall on Guam starts to be built, the Micronesia Mall. And construction starts sometime in 1986 when the Marcoses fell from power. But prior to the Marcoses falling from power, Lucio Tan sends his daughter and his son-in-law to Guam, and they start doing things. So, remember those three companies, Allied, Green Hill, and Goodwin, all of them pointing back to Allied. And then there was Columbus Development Corporation. And Columbus points to the same place that Allied points to, and that is this address. And the same address but a different name, Michael Tan and Kingston Holding Company, Inc. Now, beginning in 1986, if I'm not mistaken, all of these companies, or these companies now point, instead of pointing to Acrefield, where it was pointing for forever, I'm sorry, it wasn't Kingston, it was Acrefield. Rowena and Joseph Chua make a change to the corporate charter of Allied, where all of the other companies were linked back to, and they change the ownership of Allied to be a majority Kingston holding company. And someone named Shirley Tan is their duly authorized representative. And so now all of the companies link to Kingston. And at the time, this is my Kingston. No, that's Goodwin. Oh, here we go. And at the time, Kingston back in, I think it is 1987 or 88. In 1988, right before the Micronesia Mall opens, 8 months prior to the opening of the Micronesia Mall, Joseph Chua makes an important change to Kingston's ownership. And so Kingston, which was once owned by Iris Wong, Larry Wong, and Eusebio So, Iris and Larry having the same mailing address, P.O. Box 83082, Winning Guam 96931, as the Chuas. This corporate charter in 1988, 8 months prior to the Micronesia Mall opening, changes so that the company is now largely owned by one called Galaxy Bermuda Limited. The company does not exist on Guam. I can't find the stupid documents somewhere here among all these documents. The company does not exist on Guam. It is purportedly a Bermuda-based company. It says under the citizenship file of this corporate charter that it is a Bermuda-based company, but we don't know who owns Galaxy. And so now you have all of these companies, Goodwin, Greenhill, Allied, and Columbus Development Corporation, and all of the companies, all of the DBAs that fall under it, whether that is Micronesia Mall, American Bakery, Guam Beachfront Residences, Philippine Airlines Guam, Philippine National Bank Guam, they all point to this company called Galaxy Bermuda. And everything about these companies operate in this way so that everything leads back to Galaxy Bermuda Incorporated, which is, we don't know, it definitely has offshore accounts, and is in the Panama Papers as well. Some of the incorporators of these corporations are named in the Panama Papers as well. Some of the addresses that are used are in the Panama Papers. And that doesn't, it's not necessarily an indictment on these people or these companies itself, but it sure does add to the suspicion and to the shade. And what then sort of, and this is where the coincidence happened between, remember what I told you about that Superior Court of Guam lawsuit involving the Tropicana, the Guam Beachfront Residences Hotel, the property underneath it. And I said that there were coincidences and things that were happening, tectonic shifts that were happening in the Philippines. So this happened in 2020, between 2020 and 2021. There was a lawsuit that started in 2020, late 2020, and depositions taken in 2021 of the people involved in those lawsuits, to include Joseph Chua. So all these years, Joseph Chua had been operating all these Guam companies for his father-in-law, Lucio Tan, and he was reportedly Lucio Tan's favorite son-in-law. And then Joseph Chua's two lieutenants on this island, Phil Stragi, who's the general manager of the Micronesia Mall, and a guy named Alex Lim, who is all over these corporate documents. They get named in this lawsuit, along with Columbus Development Corporation, the oldest of Lucio Tan's companies on Guam. And at around the same time that the depositions are taken in that lawsuit, Lucio Tan switches out his long-time general manager and president of all of these companies, Joseph Chua. And he even switched out from the corporate documents, the annual report in 2021, is Joseph Chua's wife, Rowena Tan Chua, who is Lucio Tan's eldest daughter. switched out from all the Guam companies, and there is a new sheriff in town, Jesselyn Tan Yu, who is Rowena Tan's younger sister. She was the person in that picture you just saw right in the middle. That's Jesselyn Tan Yu. And Jesselyn Tan Yu in 2021, she changes all of the corporate documents for all of the Lucio Tan companies. Everywhere where it said Eusebio So or Frank Chan or Alex Lim, and definitely wherever it said Joseph Chua, Shirley Tan, and Rowena Tan, all of that was removed. And in 2021, the names, where it once said Joseph Chua, now it says Jesselyn Yu. Where it once had other names, now the names Renee Lau and Richard Chan appeared. That's for Columbus Development Corporation. It's the same for Allied Pacific. Let me just... Here's the 2021 report. Now it says Jesselyn Yu, Renee Lau, Richard Chan. For Green Hill, oh, I don't have those documents. Yes, sorry, I forgot. Alex Lim is still on it. You're right. So here's the 2015 annual report for Goodwin that shows Joseph Chua, Rowena Tan Chua, Eusebio So, and Shirley Tan. In 2021, that changes. All of it changes to Jesselyn Yu, Renee Lau, Richard Chan. So all of that changes, right? What doesn't change is all of these companies pointing back to Allied Pacific. Okay? It all changes, it all points to Allied Pacific. All of these companies, and for Allied Pacific, nothing changes about Allied Pacific's charter as well, except for Jesselyn Yu, Renee Lau, Richard Chan. It keeps its main shareholder as Kingston Holding Company Incorporated. Okay? So everything points to Allied Pacific. Everything, all the companies, all the shell corporations, they point to Allied Pacific. And Allied Pacific continues to point to Kingston Holding Company. But then Jesselyn Yu makes one pivotal change that changes the complexion of all of the Tan companies on Guam and the ownership. And no longer is Kingston owned by Galaxy Bermuda, which it had been for all of those years, but she changes it so that it's now owned by Dragon Holdings Incorporated Limited, a Bermuda-based company as well. I know, that was a lot, right? Quite interesting. And we're probably just at the beginning stages of uncovering all of this stuff. We went to the Micronesia Mall and we were like, looking at all these different stores, and we're like, we need to pull all of these corporate charters and find out what in the world is going on here. I was trying to think of it ourselves. Kandit is a corporation. Why would Kandit ever want to be owned one share by Johnny Rosario, one share by Carlos Pangilinan, and one share by Troy Torres, and 49,997 shares by Bermuda-based, Tall Tales Incorporated? Why would we do that? And I think one of the answers to that is we would do that if we wanted our money to flow to an account in Bermuda. Well, why would we want our money to flow to an account in Bermuda? I think. You want it? Because the water in Bermuda is cleaner? I don't know. These are the questions that we're asking, and these are the things that we're trying to find out. I hope that was a good explanation for you on the web of understanding that we have about these corporations. But there is something suspicious. There is something that just doesn't add up and doesn't seem right, and we're trying to get to the bottom of it. Thank you so much. In about 30 minutes, we'll be back live again, and this time when we go live, we will be live in Saipan, bringing you the oversight hearing of the Health and Welfare Committee, where they're going to bring about and talk about all the different contracts using federal pandemic funds over in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. For Troy Torres, I'm Kandit News. Good afternoon.
I'm a small business owner and I run a couple of boats. And when COVID first hit, we were kind of, at first we thought it was just like any other pandemic like the SARS, and we weren't prepared for it until unemployment is shutting down the whole industry. My whole business relies solely on tourism. When that shut down, we're kind of worried because we don't have enough savings for uncertainty of how long it's gonna last. We're so thankful that the government, the federal government, started giving out the grants, loans, and like PPP and all that. That really saved us, and it's really helping us a lot survive, you know. And right now we're still struggling, but at least it's easier. And without those grants and loans that from the federal government, I mean, we wouldn't be here.
Thank you for the unemployment assistance from the federal funds.
Thank you.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
The Jones Act is a 1920 law justified on national security grounds as a means to bolster the U.S. maritime industry. It restricts domestic shipping to vessels that are U.S. built, U.S. owned, U.S. flagged, and U.S. crewed. However, this law boosts cost by banning foreigners from competing and forcing Americans to purchase ships that are up to 8 times more expensive than those built in other countries. The result is higher transportation costs. Shipping oil from Texas to the Northeast, for example, costs 3 times more than importing oil from Africa. Ultimately, consumers foot the bill. In addition, higher shipping costs push freight from ships onto other sources of transportation, such as trucks, which means more traffic and pollution. Meanwhile, this blatant protectionism has failed to benefit builders of ships in the U.S., whose production is less than 1% of those in China and South Korea. Domestic builders have seen over 300 shipyards close since the early 1980s. Jones Act defenders claim the law ensures adequate U.S. ships during times of war, but during U.S. deployments during Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm, foreign flagged commercial ships carried twice as much equipment as their U.S. counterparts. In fact, the U.S. was so desperate for shipping that it twice requested the use of a cargo ship from Moscow. Both requests were denied. So the Jones Act has failed to achieve its shipbuilding and national security goals while driving up costs for consumers. It's time for this outdated, costly, and ineffective law to be repealed. It's time to end the Jones Act.